Hello everybody, this is Lakshmi Prabha. In residential space design, today we would be dealing with the module site selection. Site selection is the first step in construction of a house for residential use. Since a house is an asset, a very big asset for a lifetime for most people, adequate attention needs to be paid to the plot on which the house is going to be built. Moreover, if one is able to select a site which satisfies a majority of the prerequisites, it would mean that the work is almost half done, because if the selected site is not as per your requirements, it could result in a lifetime of unpleasantness or dissatisfaction that all the hard-earned money has been wasted. Careful attention needs to be paid to each and every aspect before a decision is made and a site is selected. Even after careful consideration, if one is not fully satisfied with the site, the construction of a house should not be attempted, as it would only compound the faulty decision and probably multiply the displeasure. It hence emerges that selecting a suitable site is very crucial.
You should be able to have a clear perspective about the desirable qualities to be sought after while selecting a site for constructing a residential house, such as the physical features of a site, the necessary amenities, facilities and utilities, and the other important features which contribute to a meaningful or a quality living environment. Now let us take the first aspect. The physical features that are desirable in a site are, we will make a list of them: topography, elevation, shape and size of the site, the nature of the soil, the vegetation, access to the road, the groundwater table and Vastu. Now that we have the list, let us discuss each of these one by one. Now when we say topography, it refers to the location of the site in terms of the slope of the site in relation to the road. The slope should be in such a way that it is towards the road and away from the site. This would facilitate a proper drainage of rainwater as well as wastewater. If the slope is towards the site and away from the road, the rainwater or the wastewater would stagnate on the site, and this could lead to mosquito menace. The second point is elevation. The site should have an interesting elevation. It would be ideal if the site is at an elevation or at a height, as this would give a natural regal appearance to the building. However, the site should not be too steeply elevated, as this would render transporting the construction materials and men also very expensive and difficult. If the surface of the site is uneven, this would also offer an interesting challenge in planning. Many times, split level houses may be designed on such sites which are uneven. In addition, the different levels of the site may be utilized to an advantage while planning the built-up area and also the landscape. The low-lying portion of the site may be utilized to plan an artificial water body such as a pond or a fountain, or also a sunken garden. A site on a low-lying land is to be avoided, as this could lead to stagnation of water, and also the wastewater and rainwater from the neighboring sites may flow into the site and stagnate. Similarly, A site on a completely made up soil or a leveled land is to be avoided, as over the years when the soil settles down, it may settle unevenly, which might affect the strength of the building. A plain or a leveled site does not pose any difficulty. However, there might not be any challenge also, because it would have been a leveled land. Now, marking and laying of foundation could be taken up immediately, and there may not be any delay in the construction also. Now, coming to the third point, the shape and size of the site. For all practical purposes, the site should be of a regular, rectangular or square shape. This would facilitate effective planning of the house, as most houses are either rectangular or square. As per Vastu also, irregular shaped sites are to be avoided. Practically speaking, if a site has an irregular shape, the builder or the mason would want the odd side to be left out, and the house may be planned on the remaining site. This would result in wasting of the area which has been purchased paying money. Hence, an irregular shaped site should be avoided on all counts. Similarly, too small a site or too big a site are also to be avoided. So, the size of the site should be in tune with the size of the family, the requirement, and also the budget set aside for the purchase of the site. Now, sometimes we may be tempted by too large a site, which might make us overshoot our budget, and at a later point of time the excess land might prove to be a burden also. Hence, the site should be purchased depending on the budget. Now, let us go to the next point, namely nature of the soil. The soil should support a strong foundation and also at the same time facilitate growth of vegetation. Rocky soil is strong, but it might involve a very heavy expenditure on the excavation of the rocks. The flip point would be the excavation, and the advantage would be the dugout rocks could be used in the construction. Rocky soil supports the foundation very well, but on such a soil, the groundwater may be available at great depths. And rocky soil also presents new opportunities in planning the house. One may design a house with split levels of different living areas. Now, we see in many cities houses which were built on rocks, giving them unique appearances. So, a creative designer would be able to take advantage of a heavy rocky soil also. Also, we may plan duplex houses on such soils. Now, black cotton soil and red clay soil are not considered very ideal, because during the rainy season, these soils would absorb the water unevenly and also dry unevenly, which might result in vertical cracks in the walls of the building. Now, this might affect the strength of the building also. However, the clay soil promotes growth of vegetation around the house. Now, hard muram soil, sandy soil and gravel soil are good enough for house construction. In the present day construction scenario, when the soil is clayey, one preventive measure which is being adopted by civil engineers is to lay a reinforced foundation and then to raise the walls on those. However, that might be an expensive proposition. Now, the fifth point is vegetation. The site should be observed for the presence of vegetation. Now, when we say vegetation, what we mean is any trees or plants on the site. Now, existing old fruit yielding trees like maybe a mango tree would be an asset. Similarly, if there is lush green grass on the site, that might indicate that the fertility of the soil is good and that we would be able to plan a good garden on the site. On the other hand, if the site is totally bereft of any greenery, then it may not lend itself to any elaborate garden planning. So, we need to look at the site with the view of raising a garden also. The next point is access to road. The site must have free access to a road of say 20 feet or 30 feet. This would allow free movement of vehicles and also in times of say house shifting etc., heavy vehicles would be able to reach the house. Otherwise, now if the path to the house is winding and long and narrow, then even a car you may have difficulty even to bring a car to the house. Now, the next point would be the groundwater table. Now, before finalizing on a site for residential purpose, one needs to ascertain the position of groundwater table in that particular area. Present day construction largely depends on groundwater. Hence, the depth at which groundwater may be available should be ascertained, and this should be neither too low nor too high. Now, while the former may mean more expenditure on drawing water for construction as well as for future use, now the latter may result in striking water even while digging for the foundation. This data may be obtained by consulting the local soil scientists. It may also be a safe measure to know if the land was a flood plain, which would indicate the risk of the site getting flooded in the event of heavy rainfall for more than 10 hours or say for a day. Many a time, sites are developed from lands which would have been natural water bodies such as tanks or ponds, which would have dried up in the course of time. So, there is a need to find out if the site is not from one such land, because many a time when we are buying the plot, we may not be aware as to what was the form of the land in earlier years. So, this becomes a very important factor, because once the construction is completed and we would have occupied the house, now if there is a flooding and the whole house is surrounded by water, we would be left with no choice. So, this also becomes an important factor. The next aspect is Vastu. The orientation of the site is a very important factor, as this ensures availability of sunlight and natural breeze. Presently, as we observe around us, Vastu is also being given a lot of importance with regard to the orientation of the site. A site with either an eastern or a northern orientation is generally considered ideal by many. A site should have free access to natural light and natural breeze. Say for example, if on one side of the site there is a pre-existing multi-storied construction, this would definitely block the flow of light and breeze from that side. So, when you are looking for a site for residential purpose, you should also keep in mind this factor. Now, we shall come to the amenities or the facilities or the utilities which should be available near the site. While selecting a site for house construction, we will need to check for the availability of certain utilities and facilities and amenities. Now, why do we need them? These would ensure a comfortable day-to-day functioning. Now let us see what these are, because these are required for a smooth running of a household. The first of these is protected water supply by the local government, whether it is a panchayat or a municipality or a corporation or a metro. Now, it must be inquired from the seller or the agent who would have given you the information about the site, whether drinking water supply, protected drinking water supply by the municipality or the corporation or the panchayat is existing in that particular area where the site is located. The next thing would be proper underground or surface drainage of wastewater or sewage. One must find out if the area is covered by the underground drainage sewers, which are further connected to the main city sewers. If this is not present, then the owner will definitely have to plan for a septic tank for sewage disposal. Even if the underground sewage lines are not laid out, one must physically try to know if there are wastewater ducts running on the streets for the disposal of the wastewater from the kitchen and the bathrooms. If they are not seen, it implies that the wastewater from the house would be flowing on the streets, which would definitely be an eyesore. So this also becomes an important factor. The next thing is well laid out roads. We must observe whether the roads connecting the site are metal topped or cement topped. Now, mud roads are an indication of the level of development of civic amenities in that particular area. Now, if the roads are all muddy and not laid out properly and full of gravel, now during the rainy season, you may have difficulty reaching the site and there may be a lot of potholes on the roads. The next thing would be uninterrupted or good quality power supply. Now, while inspecting the site, you should observe whether electrical lines have been laid out for the residential power supply and whether the poles are there on the road in front of your plot. The next thing would be availability of outlets selling provisions or other supplies in the proximity. Now, once the house is constructed and the family starts living there, there would be a need for provisions, vegetables, and other supplies of daily need. It should be seen if there are outlets selling those supplies at a walking distance. Many a time, what happens is the developers would market the plots where such facilities might not be there. It is for the buyer or the owner to verify if these are present. Now, the distance from these outlets should be assessed or measured in terms of the time taken to reach them by foot or by vehicle and not in terms of the kilometers. Now, similarly, stores selling medicines or medical supplies may also be required, especially when there are very young children or elderly people in the family. Now, let us see the next factor. Community facilities like a playing ground or a park for the children and for the elderly. A playground or a park in the neighborhood would be a very good feature for the plot. This would allow the children and the elderly to spend some time leisurely and also to interact with others of their own age group. Now, for children, this might help in releasing their pent-up energy to interact with their own age mates, and for the elderly also, this might provide an opportunity to share their feelings and to feel refreshed. If one is considering buying an apartment, then one must inquire if a play area for the children is being earmarked by the builder. It is being observed in the contemporary scene that a walking track is also being planned by the builders and developers. Similarly, a health club or a spa is also being planned by many builders in the complex. Another trend that we are also observing is that of gated communities. Now, if you are planning to buy a plot or a house or a villa in a gated community, then you can rest assured that all these would have been planned in that, because most of the time we see in the advertisements or their marketing gestures also, the builders would focus and highlight all these aspects. Now that we have seen some of the essential features that are required when you are buying a plot or a site for house construction, let us look at some of the other features which are also to be looked for. Even though they may not be compulsorily required, these would add to the living quality in such a site. The first thing would be a bus stop or a metro station or a subway station at a reasonable walking distance. Now, when you are assessing this point, you must remember that many times when we come back from the market or when the children are coming back from the school, the distance that they would have to walk with a bag or a bag full of provisions, or when you are traveling from somewhere. So this also becomes an important factor. The next thing would be proximity to school for the children and also to the place of work for at least one of the members, either the head of the family or the homemaker if she is gainfully employed. Now, many people feel that nearness to the place of work of the homemaker would be more advantageous because that would be less stressful for her to come back from work and take up the household work again. The next point would be a reasonable reach to the railway station or the bus station or maybe an airport if it happens to be a metro. The last factor would be closeness to shopping areas. Now, the last point would be closeness to shopping areas. Now, we may not want our plot to be very close to the shopping area, but a reasonable distance would be advantageous because in the event of having to buy something, if the shopping area is a little closer, that would be an advantage. Now, in order to ensure most of these above factors, one may look for a site in an already developed or a developing locality. Now, in case a developed site is highly expensive, then one may look for a piece of land from an area which has a reasonable chance of developing in the near future. Now, this might call for a calculated risk in forecasting the rate at which an area or a locality might develop. A safe option may be to buy a plot from an area which would have been developed by the local municipality or the corporation. Now, when a municipality or a corporation acquires land and develops it, the buyer may rest assured that the site would be well developed, having all the electrical and drainage facilities and communication facilities and roads and so on, because the job of the urban development authorities would be to develop the plot and the layout. Now, the other features, the neighborhood. Now, let us look at some of the other ancillary features that are also important when you are selecting a site to build a house to live in it. The first thing would be the neighborhood. The site should be selected in an area where the socio-economic status of the neighbors is somewhat similar. This would ensure play companions for children and also social acquaintances for the adults from a similar background. Otherwise, one might end up feeling like an odd man out or a small fish in a big pond. Such a condition may come in the way of regular day-to-day living, observation of occasions, or even celebration of functions. Sometimes, if a plot is purchased when the area has not developed, now later on the site may develop into a colony of settlers, or say a slum, or sometimes full of high-rise buildings. In any of these cases, the neighborhood may not be to one's liking, and the person may face difficulty in living day to day in their house in a peaceful way, and sometimes people may be even forced to dispose the property and buy elsewhere to be able to live peacefully. The next factor would be busy market areas. A site near a busy market should be avoided, as the roads would be busy most of the time. There would be plenty of noise and nuisance, and also security might be endangered because all kinds of people and all kinds of vehicles would be coming to the market, and the house may be in the view of all and sundry. Now, heavy vehicles coming to the market may block the roads, and the dust pollution also may be very high. Children and elderly members in the family may be forced to remain indoors even in the evenings, as the roads may not be safe for them to venture with heavy traffic all the while. Similarly, a site near a busy function hall or a cinema theatre also would pose a nuisance, since the roads would be busy constantly and there is bound to be noise pollution. In addition, the vehicles which come to the function hall or cinema theatre may be parked highly irregularly in front of your house, and you may not be able to even take out your car or scooter many times. So, this also would be an avoidable feature. The next factor would be a dumping yard. Now, the dumping yard is a place where all the waste from the city is brought and dumped. Now, if there is a dumping yard very near to the prospective site, a better decision would be to avoid it, because a dumping yard, besides being a source site, would also lead to rodent and other pest problems. The next factor would be burial ground. Now, a site in the immediate neighborhood of a burial ground is highly avoidable, not only because of the unpleasant sights, but also because of the smoke and the dust that might be emanating from the place. And we would not like to wake up or sleep to the wails or crying of the relatives of the dead. This would be avoidable. The next aspect is legal and economic issues. Now, while buying a plot, we must not spend more than 30% of the budget set aside on the site. If the site itself is going to consume a major chunk of the budget, then one might not be left with enough funds to complete the house construction, and subsequently the house construction may get delayed. If the area around the site is not developed, then the amount to be invested in the site should not exceed 10%, because the cost of development of the site would also have to be borne by the owner of the plot. So, this again has to be a calculated risk that one has to take. An important issue which should not be overlooked is the title of the site. Title in the sense the ownership of the site. The site must have a clear title, and before purchasing, one must examine if the documents pertaining to the ownership and transfer of ownership are available and original, that is, genuine. Before making the decision, one must inquire and get to know about these details from the local land revenue or the municipal office. This would rule out future litigations and complications about the title of the site. Now, one problem that many of us are encountering in the cities today is that a plot which would have been sold to one individual is being registered multiple times to others also. Now, how do we overcome this kind of a problem? Now, we need to check the ownership and the originality of the documents. Now, if one is planning to buy a plot by taking a loan or an advance from a financial institution, then it becomes mandatory to check if the site selected would qualify for obtaining a loan. Because many times nationalized banks and even some of the private banks have their own criteria in deciding as to whether a loan may be given or granted for that particular property. By consulting the concerned bank or the financial house representative, we would be having clear idea as to whether it qualifies for a loan or not. Now, before making a purchase, we also need to have clarity about the local bylaws governing house construction in that particular area. Now, the bylaws would govern the features such as a setback. Now, when we say a setback, what we mean is the area which needs to be left without any construction on all four sides of the house. So, the local bylaws would govern the features such as setbacks. Similarly, the height of the finished building, that is how much of area can be built up in that particular plot, and also such features. Now, the bylaws would govern the features such as a setback. Now, when we say a setback, what we mean is the area which needs to be left without any construction on all four sides of the house. So, the local bylaws would govern the features such as setbacks. Similarly, the height of the finished building, that is how much of area can be built up in that particular plot, and also such features. So, in addition, we also need to inquire if the plot is in a residential zone, because by mistake, if we have purchased a plot and later on that plot happens to be in an industrial zone or a commercial zone, then we might have problems living in that house, because every amenity that the municipality provides, now all these amenities are linked to the zoning regulations. Now, it may seem like a Herculean task to identify a site with all the above qualities. It may not be in fact possible to identify a site which satisfies all the above stated desirable features. However, then how do we decide? Now, if I am not going to get all the possible features, then does that mean that I am not going to buy a plot at all? No. On the other hand, we need to prioritize and then come to an understanding as to which factors are most important and which can be overlooked, depending on the demand and depending on the resources on hand, and also depending on the urgency of the situation. The most important factors, however, which should not be bargained for could be the level of development of the site, then a clear ownership of the plot, and also a scope for future growth. Now, this becomes very imperative because a purchase of the site to build a house is a lifelong or a lifetime financial investment.
To conclude, now in today's module, we have seen the various factors that we need to take into consideration when we are buying a plot. So, this knowledge of the various factors that you need to look into before buying a plot would help you in identifying a plot which is suitable to you in all ways, which would help you to build a house and then live happily. Thank you.